order. My phone just conked out with the agenda. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? All right, seeing none. Here you go, Tony. We get to item 3, the approval of the minutes. Oh, sorry, that's not you yet. The approval of the minutes. So the minutes of February 3rd are attached to the agenda. We just need consensus. Anybody have any suggestions for change or modification in any way? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chairman Don. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I noted there was quite a lengthy discussion last meeting about heritage conservation, Section 3 of the Planning Act and things like that, and it's really not reflected in the minutes. I was a little maybe dismayed that there isn't a little more detail in those minutes about those subjects, since there was a lengthy discussion on them.
Okay. I don't know if that's sort of there's a standard way of doing minutes here, and I don't know whether you want a more detailed transcript. Typically, I guess the clerk can maybe speak to this, but how much detail do you normally go into in minutes of a meeting?
Is there anything specific you would like added, Councillor Foster?
Well, I would have liked to have seen, like, there's virtually nothing. There, like a fairly lengthy discussion occurred, and there's virtually nothing in the minutes to reflect even a modicum of that discussion. There's barely a sentence, Devlin.
The minutes are without note or comment, so I think just because the motion was never seconded, we just tried to not take over the minutes too much with that discussion.
Andy?
Yeah, correct. Just adding to Devlin's point, minutes are only a recording of the actions of the committee and the discussions with goes to those. So they're not verbatims of the conversations taking place at the committee meetings or council meetings, and that's a standard format for recording advisory as well as council meetings.
I wouldn't, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't expect verbatim, but there's literally nothing, not a sentence.
Did you want to propose an amendment to the minutes and just note that there was extensive discussion on this issue?
At a bare minimum, yes. The issue being Section 3 of the Planning Act and conformity there too. Like Don, there's nothing, not barely a word. I don't expect a full verbatim transcript, but we need to do a little more than what we do, in my view.
Well, is that a problem? Just putting in like one line?
At a minimum.
Yeah, saying that we ended up discussing a particular submission or compliance with Section 3, something like that.
At a minimum.
Yeah, and just make a note that it was an extensive discussion, even though
exactly.
They're recorded verbally or verbatim. Is that acceptable amendment to the minutes? Devlin, you're okay with that?
It's a small step.
I'm fine with that if committee's fine with that.
Okay, are we all good with that? All right, that makes a note. That for anybody reading it then knows that we did deal with it or discuss it.
Exactly. That's it.
Okay. Fair enough. Anything else about the minutes? No, so can we say by consensus they're approved then, subject to that small change that we're going to make?
Yes.
Everybody good with that? Okay. All right. So here we go, Tony. Approval of the agenda. Anybody have any concerns or suggestions for change of the agenda? Tony.
Yes, I would just like to add one item regarding communications about this committee, and I can explain a little bit more now or mention it when we add it to the agenda, whatever you think.
Well, this is when you're going to add it to the agenda.
Oh,
if
okay.
we are, so I would suggest you talk about it now.
Okay, so my thought is, unless there's a plan to do this already, I thought it would be very useful to put out a communication press release through the media to maybe explain who's now on the committee, what their affiliation is, the objectives of the committee. Because there's been, for those of you who are on Facebook, might have seen some chatter go by about who is on this committee, how do they get to be on it, and a bit of almost kind of skepticism. And I thought it would be great if people understood sort of the objective of the committee, who's on it, to be short. So I don't know if the council or if the municipal communications department ever issues releases around individual advisory committees, but I thought that might be helpful.
Okay, does anybody else have any feelings about that? I'm not sure it's something we would do or the township would do. I know at the beginning of every council term, there's all kinds of information about establishing the committees in terms of reference and who is on them and how they're selected. And of course, then there's a public selection process as well, which of course reminds me that I neglected to introduce our newest member who just came through that process, Michael. So we'll give you a chance to talk a little bit about yourself, Michael, when we finish this discussion. Sorry about that. Anyway, Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Don. Tony, I understand what your desire is here to get some positive communication. It's not our typical response to respond to every negative comment received or seen out in the community as Facebook. The terms of reference are very clear about the committee criteria of how we select and who we select on the committee. Your personal information is also confidential information. So that is why the process is the way it is. It's not something that we as a municipality have the right to provide your expertise or your knowledge and skill set that you applied for out to the public. Many cases where if we are to respond to some of the negative comments, it just stirs up additional comments back and forth within the community. And in many of these cases, the situations are a little bit chatty for a few days and then they tend to go away. And the more positive components, I think, are more out of the work that the committee does and showing the things and the actions that come out of the committee speak more volume into getting into a back and forth with individuals that haven't been happy with the process.
Okay.
Kelly.
I just wanted to go back to our terms of reference for this committee. And one of the bullet points about what this committee is about, it says to work with the township communication coordinator to provide content and key messages that contribute to effective two-way communication with the public on growth-related issues and opportunities. So I think what Tony's talking about is make sure that we get those positive message out. So that's right in keeping with our mandate. I completely agree with Andy. We don't want to be reactive and we don't want to be responding negative, but we want to get the positive out there. And I think that's what Tony's talking about. So I think it fits within one of the purposes of this committee is to connect with our citizens directly on what we're doing and what we're all about here. And I think we have an obligation to do that. So I know we don't want to be trolling Facebook and responding to everything that comes out on Facebook, but when there are those negative messages, maybe it is time not to react, but to put out the positive message about what this committee is about, and it's written right into our terms of reference. So I think we can work with our communications coordinator Kendra to get something out there, and just to make sure that we profile this group. We have really, really good members on this committee, and all of you are here for a very specific reason. And we want to make sure that the public is aware that we've pulled this group together and this is what our mandate is and this is what we're working towards. So I think it probably makes sense. You know, now we have Michael joining us here. Welcome, Michael, that we get something out, and this is a really good excuse to get some positive stuff out.
So that will be coming from Kendra. Is that the gist of that?
I'll default to our head of operations and CAO, Andy Goldie, to make those determinations, but it does fit within our terms of reference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll work with Kendra.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor, for your comments. Can we include in such a a press release, a clear statement of the mandate of this committee. That's an important thing. The public needs to know what the mandate is. What exactly are we doing? I'd like to see a statement of our mandate in such a press release.
Well, I think that's a reference to the terms of reference. I see a thumbs up in the mayor's box. I assume that means.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, it's important that the public understand what exactly we're doing, what our mandate is, what our role is.
Yeah.
Because I'm
Fair
not
enough.
sure that's clear.
And we
To
have,
the
well, it
public.
was there one time, but we've had changes in the membership since then. So it's, as the mayor says, it's a good opportunity to refresh everybody's memory and kick
Yes.
us off. Okay, that's the agenda. So I don't think, Tony, that's becomes necessarily now an agenda item. That's just sort of an action item coming out of that discussion. So we can then say, unless there's any other discussion, are we in a position to approve our agenda and move on right now with that? Yes, anybody have a concern about that? All right, we'll take that as a positive consensus. And before we go any further, and apropos of our discussion, we do have a new member, Michael, and I hope I get this right, Trussell or Trussell. I don't know for sure. Welcome, Michael, and congratulations on being selected. You may come to find that that's a good thing or not a good thing. I don't know. But perhaps you'd like to give us a very brief introduction of yourself and maybe tell us in 25 words or less what drew you to be on this committee in the first place, because we're just approaching very interesting times with what we're doing. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Is Michael Trussell, and I go by Michael or Mike, either are fine. I've had my first technical issue already this morning, so fingers crossed that that's the last one. I'm a father to 3 daughters. I have an Australian Shepherd that will inevitably interrupt one of these meetings sooner or later. My family and I moved to Salem from Guelph in 2017. And it was really Center Wellington's unique natural environment, heritage features, and just the small town feel that led us to fall in love with this community and want to relocate here. I'm an architect by profession and a co-founder of an architectural practice based in Waterloo that's called Edge Architects. I've been the project lead for a number of private and public sector developments, including here in Center Wellington. Most recently, I was the architect for the Trailside Medical Center, which has just opened on BD Line in Fergus. I'm excited to join this committee. I think I can perhaps offer a unique perspective from my design consulting background. And I'm really enthusiastic about the initiative to create opportunities for affordable or more attainable housing here in our community, because I think it's seriously needed. So.
All right, thank you. And I think you're going to get an opportunity to discuss all of those things, because we are obviously focusing on attainable housing, and we also dabble into design guidelines and development standards and all of that kind of thing. So in fact, you're going to get I guess, a little bit of a taste of that in the next item. So welcome again. And it sounds like your qualifications are something we definitely need and we'll welcome. So hope you enjoy it. Also want to welcome this morning, Nico and Steve Wright just came in while we were talking. Hi, guys. And that takes us to item 5.1. And visitors, Colin and Adam, we're going to talk about, I think, a very exciting project, St. David Conceptual Design.
Yeah,
Very important.
great. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the Healthy Growth Advisory Committee. Thanks for having us this morning. I'm here along with Adam Gilmore, who's our relatively new manager of engineering, and Adam's just going to share his screen. We have a bit of a presentation that's on the agenda, but we'll throw it up on screen here as well, and just kind of walk through a few slides that we have just to spark some discussion, spark some brainstorming on what we're calling kind of reshape your St. David Street. So creating a vibrant, safe, and accessible corridor within Center Wellington. And so we've got a few slides here, some conceptual options that we're going to just kind of describe to you. And yeah, we're really looking for feedback on the various options. So just kind of stepping back, big picture, we're at the early stages of this project. So St. David Street is slated for a full reconstruction. Water main, sanitary sewers, storm sewers, sidewalks, full reconstruction is being planned. The road is at the end of its service life. And so we really we have an opportunity to kind of reimagine what St. David Street is going to look like. And this is, these projects like St. David Street is going to be like this for the next 50, 60 years, who knows, maybe even longer. So we want to make sure we're doing the right job and making the right decisions when we do this project. And just a quick timeline, just so we see where we are. So we're in a public consultation phase currently. We'll be reporting back to council in the summer and establishing the preferred conceptual design option. And that'll allow us to go into detailed design for the project later this year and into 22, with most of the construction happening in 23, the majority of the construction in 23. Next slide. And just visually, this is a big project. So you can kind of see it starts at St. David Street, just north of the intersection at St. Andrew Street, and extends north up to Garifraxa. And then we've got another section north of Garifraxa that goes right up to Edinburgh Avenue, kind of Black Street, that intersection close to the landmark there, I guess, is the beer store. So a large project, and it's, again, like I said, a full reconstruction. The next slide. And so I think I mentioned most of these things. We are looking to apply for a grant for this as well. So the province defines this as what they call a connecting links. So this is a connecting link for Highway 6. So we're eligible for 90% funding for the road component only. So we definitely want to leverage that funding. There'll still be, costs for the municipality, the sidewalks, street lights, any amenities or features that we do look at, but the road itself is a grant funded by the province. 90% township would be responsible for the 10% section of the road. It's a high priority. Oh, sorry, I'm just stay there. It's a high priority in our asset management plan. This project got a number of assets at the end of life, so we do want to move this. This is a high priority project for the township, and just it's part of the downtown core, part of Highway 6, as we all know. And just the last point there, it's an important regional and local mobility corridor, economic hub for local business, and it's really a gateway into Centre Wellington's cultural and architectural heritage as well. So pretty important section of road. So just some context, and as we were looking at these design options, we've got a transportation master plan that was approved by council in 2019 that has a complete streets policy included in it. And really that's all about not just designing the road, focusing on the automobile, but also looking at other modes of transportation, whether it's active transportation like cycling, making sure our projects are fully accessible, and also for pedestrian use as well. We want to make sure that we're accommodating a full suite of transportation options within our streets. And then also we've got active transportations highlighted in the strategic plan as well as an important initiative for this council. Next slide. And we want to look at traffic calming too. So I know we receive complaints all the time, unfortunately, about speeding and drivers, excessively speeding through down streets. And so as we're building new streets or redesigning existing streets, we're looking for opportunities to slow traffic down. And you may have noticed some examples we've put in over the years, like Water Street, where we've done the bump outs. It's really to create these kind of pinch points or areas of friction that help slow drivers down. Colburn Street's another great example. We did some on St. Andrew East a few years ago as well, just past Gart Shore. So, you know, these things are traffic calming measures where we're just trying to slow drivers down, just create a little bit more of a confined environment and reduce vehicle speeds. We want to support downtown businesses and ensure that shoppers can access establishments, both vehicles and through active transportation. And then we have an opportunity, I think, as well to include, you know, to improve the aesthetic of the street, you know, whether it's through benches, the decorative street lights that we do have in downtown Fergus. We have an opportunity to add street trees as well through this project, create space so that they can thrive within the road allowance, and really add to the visual appeal of the streetscape. That's also a goal to complement, of course, our cultural and architectural heritage in the downtown and in that whole corridor. And I think with that, kind of tag teaming this with Adam, so I'll hand it over to Adam to walk us through the 4 design options, conceptual design options. Over to you, Adam.
Yeah, thanks very much, Colin. And yeah, pleasure to be here. I see some familiar faces now, so I've met some of you, and some of you have not met. So for those of you who haven't met, I'm relatively new to the township. I started in January. Really excited to be here to talk to you about this project and other projects going forward. So thank you for having me. So to pick up where Colin left off, so we wanted to, you know, really this is about imagining what this street could look like in the future. And so we wanted to prepare some conceptual designs to kind of help with that visualization and kind of hone in on, you know, eventually our detailed design and constructing and building this. So I'm going to show you some options we've developed. There are 4 options. I'm going to walk you through some of the key features, some opportunities and constraints of each option, and just some visuals to kind of help you see, you know, what would this actually look like. So this is part of a public consultation effort that we're embarking on this month. It'll probably extend a little bit into April. And we're going to be going back to our council when we're done this to report on what we've heard through this public consultation. So this feedback is very important. And all of this information will inform eventually the detailed design and the construction of the project. So jumping into the options here. So I mentioned there are 4. So the first option is to replace the existing. So essentially just match what's there currently. So it'd be matching the vehicle travel lanes, the on-street parking, boulevards, and sidewalks. So some of the opportunities and constraints with this option, we expect we're going to maintain a similar flow of vehicle traffic. We've identified a set of parking spaces we're calling the highly utilized on-street parking spaces. So that's in the block between St. Andrew Street and St. Patrick Street. We've done some kind of survey work and just kind of observing how often those spaces are used, and that seems to be the area where the spaces are used most frequently. So we're going to be referencing these 14 spaces throughout the presentation here. So there'd be no change to those highly utilized spaces under the replace existing option. We really don't have an opportunity with this option to improve active transportation, and Colin spoke to our complete streets policy and our transportation master plan. So it's not really in line with our complete streets policy. And we have a limited opportunity to improve the visual appeal of the streetscape. So adding things like benches, decorative street lights and trees, limited opportunity with this option. And so this is what it looks like. And I apologize here, the graphics are a bit small, but hopefully they help to give you kind of a flavor for what it would look like. And if you've been to the street and you've seen it, which I'm sure you have, we essentially what will go back will look very similar to what's there now. So here we have the on-street parking lanes. You can see the sidewalk boulevard widths remain the same and the vehicle travel lane widths remain the same. Option 2, we would remove the on-street parking lanes and increase the boulevard and sidewalk widths. So we would also increase the vehicle travel lanes slightly in this option. So some of the opportunities and constraints, so we would maintain a similar flow of vehicle traffic. We would have the opportunity here to improve the aesthetic of the street and add these decorative features. We would be eliminating all on-street parking in this option, so we'd lose those 14 highly utilized spaces. And we would expect a moderate improvement to active transportation, mainly from the walking perspective, where we'd have wider sidewalks in this case, make it a little more walkable. And this is what it looks like. You can see here we've widened the boulevards and sidewalks, so now we can add these elements like trees, decorative lampposts. You see that we've removed the on-street parking and increased the vehicle travel lane width slightly. Option 3, we would maintain, this is kind of a hybrid option, so we'd maintain on-street parking from St. Andrew to St. Patrick, eliminate on-street parking elsewhere. So this would give us the option of increasing the boulevard and sidewalk widths where we've eliminated on-street parking. We'd also increase the traveling width slightly in this option. Opportunities and constraints, we'd maintain a similar flow of traffic. We would have an opportunity to improve the visual appeal of the streetscape, and we would maintain those 14 highly utilized spaces. And again, in this option, a moderate improvement to active transportation from the walkability perspective. And this is what that looks like. So in that block from St. Andrew to St. Patrick, relatively unchanged, maintaining on-street parking. And then further north, we've eliminated on-street parking, increased the width of those sidewalks and boulevards, and added those decorative features. So finally, option 4, we call the separated cycling lane option. So under this option, we've added separating cycling lanes on both sides of St. David from St. Andrew Street to Hill Street, and then unseparated bike lanes from Hill Street north all the way to the project limit at Edinburgh. So in this case, we would still found a way to maintain on-street parking on the west side of St. David Street. So we'd eliminate on-street parking on the east side, but maintain it on the west side. And that would be all the way from St. Andrew to Hill Street. This option does give us the opportunity to increase the width of boulevards and sidewalks and include those decorative features. However, to kind of make this all fit, we had to reduce the vehicle travel lanes by approximately 1 meter or 3 feet. So some of the opportunities and constraints here. So this definitely improves active transportation from a cycling and walking perspective. So this is certainly in line with our complete streets policy. We feel like the separated cycling lanes are certainly justified from a safety perspective, given the volume of traffic and the truck traffic in this area. Having that separation between cyclists and the vehicle traffic, from a safety perspective, really is warranted. We have the opportunity to improve the visual appeal of the streetscape, and reduction in lane width could be a positive in this case, and it could change driver behavior in a good way, where as Colin mentioned, creating those kind of friction points actually causes drivers to reduce their travel speed. So slowing everything down from a safety perspective is good. And we have a reduction in the highly utilized parking spaces from 14 to 4 spaces. But I want to note here, there's still, we think, quite a bit of parking that's available on the west side of St. David Street. So there'll still be a total of 19 spaces going from St. Andrew all the way up to Hill Street on the west side of St. David Street. Here's what that option looks like. So the separated cycling lanes, what we've done is on the west side of the street, we've used the on-street parking as kind of the divider between the vehicle travel lanes and the cycling lanes, with a buffer included in there to ensure that, when people are opening doors and whatnot, it's still safe for the cyclists. And then on the east side of the street, we would be including a barrier. It's kind of flexible in terms of what that barrier could be, but an idea that we like is these planters. They could be temporary planters, so they could be removable, but it gives an option to actually include some plantings and kind of add to the visual appeal of the street. And so once you get to Hill Street, the divided or separated cycling lanes turn into undivided cycling lanes heading north past Garifraxon Street. So what does this look like in practice? So, other Canadian municipalities are implementing these types of separated cycling lanes. So here on the left, you can see an example of a parking separated cycling lane. And then on the right, an example of a planter separated cycling lane. Yeah, so we're embarking on this through this public consultation. We've created a virtual open house. The webpage went live yesterday. We certainly encourage everybody to go to this webpage, and there's a survey on there, so you can actually kind of provide your input into the project. So it's on Connect CW, and we've branded this Reshape Your St. David Street. So if you head to Connect CW, you'll see it on the list there, Reshape Your St. David Street. We encourage you to visit and complete the survey. I mentioned we're going to be assembling all this information, reporting back to council this spring to present to them what we've heard and kind of hone in on preferred conceptual design option. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time, and welcome any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Are there any questions for our presenters? Brian.
Merely wanted to ask Mr. Gilmore, will the left turn to go east at the corner of St. Andrew and St. David still be viable?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Is it Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. Yes, so the left turn lane at St. David and St. Andrew to head east on St. Andrew will still be there.
Great. Good.
Yeah,
thank you.
And that's under all options.
Great.
Don.
Thank you, Chairman Don. Thanks for the presentation. It's great. I have 2 or 3 things that I'd like to bring up. I drive that strip every day, so I see the action of the trucks and stuff. First of all, parking. Downtown lost a whole bunch of parking when the library went in, and downtown is really dependent on parking. I don't know whether there's somewhere on St. Patrick Street could be enlarged or something to take some more of the parking. That's number 1. Number 2 is the turning at Garifraxa Street. For a tractor trailer to turn, if he's going north, to turn right, he has to start off in the center lane. He cannot make that corner. And that's all 4 corners. Doesn't matter whether it's a truck coming south to go to A.O. Smith, is those corners are way too tight for truck traffic. I have a second issue, is I'm chair of economic development, and we are currently trying to expand the business park. And so we will have increased traffic that are going to need to get there, trucks and whatever. So that is really a key thing that would really help the traffic at that corner. So part of this is if we reduce the travel lanes, we have to keep in mind that this is still the heart of getting to northern part of the central Ontario. If we're using part of the roadway for bikes and stuff, that's great. But I would think we should be really getting a timeline on the bypass so that it would take some of the truck traffic off of that road. That's it. Just some comments.
Thank you. Any response to that before we move on? Colin or Adam?
Yeah, I could just jotted some notes down here. So no, all great points through Mr. Chair. Yeah, certainly we're cognizant of the parking issues for downtown and how vital having adequate and convenient parking to the downtown is to the local businesses. So yeah, we're very aware of wanting to provide the sufficient parking. And definitely though, that's some great comments on the truck turning movements at Garifraxa. I know that is a county intersection, and I know there's been some property. It's very tight with the homes right there and the amount of property that's available. But that's some good intelligence for us that we'll take back to the design team and see if there's any opportunities as part of the reconstruction to make that corner better.
That's great. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, and just on the bypass as well, I can the truck bypass, if I can. So yeah, we have had discussions with MTO recently. I know some of the councillors in Mayor Linton met with the Minister of Transportation at Roma a while ago now to discuss about that. And so we do have kind of a signage plan we're working with MTO on to get that bypass in place. So it is moving ahead. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, a couple here. Ian, Councillor McCrae. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman Fisher. Had trouble finding my unmute. I had a chance to meet with representatives from the Elora Cataract Trailway Association and the Welly Loop last week, and they shared with me their comments about the proposed option 4. First of all, they're very appreciative of the township being interested in incorporating more cycling infrastructure in the community. They had concerns that option 4 probably wouldn't be used that much by the majority of cyclists in our community, given they're more recreational than business focused, and they would be uncomfortable riding up a hill as well as riding up a hill with trucks driving by. The Elora Cataract Trailway Association is also looking at an alternative route through Fergus to connect the two ends of the trail where they come into Fergus at both ends. They're looking at Hill Street as a possible street to use rather than the current ones that they're using. So they're wondering if it would be possible to focus on having some sort of a pedestrian cycling crossing at Hill Street to allow them to get across Highway 6. Welly Loop shares similar concerns, but of course they're focused on St. George Street, having some sort of a pedestrian cycling crossing at St. George. But regardless, what they're seeing is their main focus for active transportation is how do you cross Highway 6? And could the community look at coming up with some sort of a crossing either on Hill Street or St. George rather than having the cycling lanes going up and down St. David? Their big concern is that if these cycling lanes are not used and you've lost parking spaces, it will be a lightning rod for people opposed to having cycling infrastructure in place. So they just wanted me to share those comments.
Okay, thank you. Any response, guys, to that?
Through Mr. Chair. So yeah, thank you for the comments, Councillor McCrae. I think those, we were curious. This is why we're throwing the ideas out to try to get some feedback and understand, what the community is interested in and not interested in, right? So that's some great feedback. So thank you for providing that.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian, for those comments. I was thinking along the same lines, Ian. It's quite hazardous, I think, to ride a bicycle currently from St. Andrew, St. David northward along that corridor. It's just so busy, and you've got with whether there is parking or there isn't parking, it's a very, very busy roadway, and I'm wondering if that's potentially just not the right place for cycling lanes. I'd like to see, I think about someone who lives up around Dixon's, and let's say they want to ride their bicycle downtown. I'm wondering if a better spot for cycling lanes would be either on Provost Lane or Tower Street around the Presbyterian Church downward, or also Gowrie, or in other words, one street over from St. David in either direction. To me, that might be a preferable place for cycling lanes that travel northward and southward. It also makes it easier to ride your bike to the core, or from the core to the northern business park, or the business area rather, around Walmart and Dixon. So I'm wondering if you've considered, Adam or Colin, a north-south cycling route that is alternative to St. David, such as Gowrie or Provost Lane. Have you put any thought in those routes as a better place for cycling and cycling lanes?
Through Mr. Chair. So certainly we've those are options, right? And those streets are definitely a lot quieter. I think maybe the grade on those streets might be a little bit steeper. St. David's a bit more of a gradual slope, but but yeah, certainly, you know, again, that's the discussion we want to have, is try to understand what the preferences of the folks that do want to cycle in and around the community. Understand it is mostly recreational cyclists looking to get out and get some exercise at this stage in life, but you know, that may change where more people are taking trips to do shopping or to run an errand, and so that's kind of the best practice is looking at the collector or arterial road system and providing opportunities for all modes of transportation. But point well taken that there are adjacent streets that are much quieter that could be used for cycling as well. That's no question. No question there.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Who hasn't gone? Nico.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring to your attention the fact that we have two fairly major social housing hubs just to the north of what we're talking about. And I've seen people from those hubs that are disabled and trying to make their way to downtown in a motorized wheelchair that have some significant difficulties. So I'm not suggesting anything other than simply to bring to your attention that I think that there are a disproportionate number of disabled persons within those communities that consistently try to make their way downtown. It's just an observation.
Thank you. Anybody else? Who else has their hand? Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points that I think are important is I agree and concur with Councillor Foster's comments with regards to, is it necessary to have bike lanes on a major thoroughfare through Fergus? I understand in the comments about trying to slow traffic through our downtown. I think that's really appreciative. But I don't sure that this is the major thoroughfare through Fergus that we should be trying to calm traffic, because if anybody has ever tried to cross over Highway 6 on a long weekend on a Friday afternoon, traffic queuing on that whole road, as it is with the number of lights that are through town, is essentially backed up right through to the Zares Plaza at different times and at different strategies. So we have to be very cognizant that it is a major thoroughfare, as I think Don had mentioned. And I think we have to understand that it's an extension of provincial road being Highway 6. So that is definitely a provincial roadway through there, although it is maintained by the county, I guess, through town. But the point being is, I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to slow traffic down so much so that it's just a total frustration for traffic, vehicle traffic. The businesses, I'm very concerned about some of the businesses along that strip that have had to close and suffer through this whole COVID affair, and especially the restaurants and stuff. And now we're going to reconstruct those roads. Like, it's definitely a necessity, but I think we have to make special provisions or at least consideration for those businesses, especially the restaurants and the clothing store along there. And there's a hair salon too as well. It just might be very devastating for those businesses. And then the one thing that I think definitely needs to be repaired is the corner of the parking lot at the convenience store, because that is, if anything, a road improvement can be considered, it's to control traffic through that corner, because that convenience store corner is often a right turn lane for much traffic that is because of the way the curb and the parking lot is connected to the road there. So I think if anything can come out of this, that definitely has to be considered. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are good comments. Anybody else? Tony.
Thanks. I wanted to just say that this is really two things. One is it's fantastic that the community is being given an opportunity to comment on this. I love that. I think that's wonderful. And two, I would like to say, I'm really happy to hear that street trees are likely, assuming we don't go with option one, are going to be part of the plan going forward. And that is great. And obviously the more room that they can get, the better. So thank you for including them.
Thank you, Tony. And is that, maybe this is a question for Colin as well as Tony, is that in terms of the types of trees, size of trees, is that something that's contained in sort of construction standards, or would you do it in consultation, for example, with neighborhoods or somebody like that? Or is that just something we do as a matter of course? How do we pick those trees?
We've tried to pick the right size and species of trees appropriate for the location. What we've heard, we've had recent experience with East Mill and some of the feedback there, and what we try to get the right size of tree so that it's not obstructing business signage. So from the get-go, the trees are mature enough so that they do provide sufficient height and canopy that you can still from the street level kind of see the business signage and behind. So that's part of the goal. I don't think we're really 100% set on which species we would select. We do that in consultation maybe with Tony and also Matthew LN in terms of what would be suitable. But those are some of the kind of the principles that we would use in terms of picking the right species, right size for the right location.
Thanks. Anybody hasn't gone yet? Just before we get around to seconds, I have a couple of questions too, and I think they're following up on some of the questions that we've already heard. The first one is, I noticed that at least 3 of the 4 options, it's noted that they maintain a similar flow of traffic. I wonder, are there projections for significant increases in that flow of traffic over the lifetime of this project, and how any of those options might be impacted by that in terms of increased volume of traffic? And then the follow-up question to that relating to the trucks. I know when the St. David Street Bridge was being reconstructed, trucks were diverted, truck traffic was diverted. And I wonder if, I don't know this, I assume those diversions no longer exist. I wonder if they were, I know there's an intention to have a permanent bypass, but in the interim, I wonder if any of them could be sort of put in place, especially if you go with, I think, option 4, which I think the comments that we've heard is maybe that's not as compatible with high levels of truck traffic as some of the other options. So those are just questions I have, and if there's an answer, fine. If there isn't, so be it. Anybody? Adam?
Go ahead, Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can speak perhaps to the first part, and then Colin, if you don't mind kind of picking up for the second part of the question there. But with respect, Chair Don, to consideration of future traffic and growth and traffic increasing over time, I think that's something we would certainly look at through our detailed design, in terms of what is the design requirement currently, and what's the projected design requirement in the future, and we would certainly want to give consideration to that increase in travel and traffic over time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to the truck diversion. So we do have I guess commitment from MTO to provide signage for a truck bypass for downtown Fergus. It follows the County Road 7 up to County Road 17 route back onto Highway 6. And so we are working with MTO on that, getting those signs created and installed. In terms of during construction, like we would be looking at a detour. It wouldn't be as significant of a detour as what we had when St. David Street Bridge was closed. If you recall, we had a significant detour, basically using the same as our truck bypass route through County Road 7 and County Road 17. This one, we would look at kind of more local traffic down St. Andrew Street to Guard Shore, and then back likely through Gordon Street or Garifraxa. So certainly going to be a little congestion during the construction period, but that's we have the opportunity because we did the intersection at St. Andrew and St. David as part of the bridge, St. David Street Bridge works. We have that opportunity to divert traffic a little more locally this time, and use that detour route instead. So.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right, doesn't look like it. Again, thank you very much, gentlemen. That was fascinating, and this is a very big and important project. So we look forward to seeing how it unfolds. But thank you very much for sharing it with us today.
Excellent, and thanks for having us. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Well, it's the kind of thing we like to see here. So,
there you go.
All right.
Good day. Thanks.
Where are we here? So that takes us to item 6, the the Attainable Housing Work Plan. There's a document there. Before we get started, I just want to ensure that everybody got a copy. We did receive a written submission with respect to this item a couple of days ago, and the clerk, I believe, Devlin, has forwarded that submission. It came to some people, but not all members. So I think Devlin has forwarded that to everybody. Just want to confirm that everybody has it and has seen it. It is quite detailed, and there's a lot in it. So we want to just acknowledge that we have received it and that we have looked at it, and it will inform our discussion going forward. So with that, I'm not quite sure how we want to proceed with the work plan as we've seen here. Do we want to get into detailed discussion of each of the proposed actions at this point in time? Do we just want to accept it in general and maybe give it more thought as we go forward? I'm just kind of in your hands, I guess, Brett or Andy, to how we proceed with this document. As Tony said, it's a great document. It's very informative and I think will be very useful, but how are we supposed to deal with it going forward in your mind?
Well, I would say, I mean, it was put on the agenda for information purposes, and it was really developed for staff to use as a tool to keep the recommendations, on the left side of the panel that are from the county attainable housing strategy, which is where we started a few months ago, just to keep track of the different parameters that are the discussion points that we might have in the future, the progress that's made, who's involved, who has responsibility. It wasn't really intended for the committee to approve it or endorse it. It's just something to keep track of the progress. The idea from it was suggested by Mayor Linton after our last meeting, because we use a very similar thing with the economic development subcommittees that are looking at economic recovery. So after during the economic crisis first started in March and we were shutting down and trying to help businesses, the economic recovery subcommittee was meeting every week or every other week. And again, in order to keep track of progress on the actions, staff created a matrix that we continued to use throughout the process just to keep track of progress. So, I think the first box in the work plan, which is the coming up with a target and definition, which we've engaged the U of G students, is really the most important thing that we need to get resolved before we can make a whole lot of progress on any of the other items. And maybe Mariana could give a little update on where the students are at. She's been the liaison specifically. But other than that, the work plan was intended to be to track the progress and that staff would keep it up to date. So it was placed for information only.
Okay, before we get to Mariana, Councillor Foster, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. A question for Brett. Would this work plan, Brett, if this was basically by this committee, it would be subject to approval by, will it come back to council? Is it approved by council?
The work
What
plan
is-
itself?
Yes.
No, I don't think so. I think as a result of the work plan, there may be a recommendation to council that this advisory committee makes specifically that would go to council. But the plan itself, I don't see it needing to be approved by council, but
Well, I'd like to understand, Brett, if like this committee doesn't have, decision-making authority, if you will, it has to, my sense is that it would have to come back to council to be approved, any work plan on attainable housing. Am I missing something there? My sense would be that any work plan suggested by this committee would have to be approved by council.
I mean, I'm not the person to ask that question, answer that
Mayor
question.
Linton has his hand up. Maybe he is.
Yeah, the mandate of this committee is very clear, to provide recommendations to council when it comes to anything related to ensuring that our community grows in healthy and smart ways in the future. So any recommendation, and obviously this committee doesn't have decision-making authority, but it does have the ability to establish a work plan to make sure that the conversations that we have are productive and we get things done here. And so any recommendation or suggestion that comes from this committee, obviously that goes to council. We don't need council to approve a work plan that is just providing direction and providing some structure to how we organize our discussions here, because it's really critical that we start to move ahead with real solid practical recommendations that go up to council when it comes to attainable housing. And one of the ways that we make sure that we drive to recommended action is to put it in a spreadsheet like this so that we're tracking, because we have some really good discussions here as a group. We have to make sure we're driving towards recommendations, and obviously those recommendations are the only thing that have to go back to council for council's approval. So this is just a tool that we can use to make sure that we're organizing our discussions and making sure we're talking about the most important things to this community.
Okay, Andy.
Thank you, Chair Don. Yeah, just adding to the mayor's point. So just giving an example, as we quickly pivoted with the Economic Development Committee at the beginning of COVID, there were a number of discussions at the subcommittee to help about the economic recovery and discussions about how to help our local businesses. So the committee talked about a number of actions and things in nature that felt would help support. The one that they did bring forward to council for support is looking at a financial package to help support some businesses with patios and other types of things, up to a grant for $50,000 that we work with the community futures. So that was brought forward as a recommendation. However, the development and discussions around that were all through a work plan to look at various different items, and that was all discussed at the committee without going back to council prior to us coming forward with a final action that we felt we wanted to have approved or debated and discussed at council for direction.
Thank you. That kind of goes to my original question, I guess, is that based on that, even though it might only be an information item today, at some point, the fact that we're going to or expected to make recommendations on these items implies that we discuss them ourselves, each of them in detail, and either say yay or nay in terms of what we're willing to recommend to council. And then, of course, to Councillor Foster's point, those recommendations again have to be ultimately approved by council before anything actually happens on them. So is the intent to take this document and maybe, if not this meeting, start at future meetings, next meeting, and move through each of these items and discuss them in detail and decide whether or not we're prepared to make recommendations on those items, and using this as a framework for those discussions? I think that's what the mayor was saying. I see thumbs up around here. Anybody have a different point of view on that or a suggestion? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I just don't see how we can develop a work plan for attainable housing and ignore or otherwise not consider heritage matters, many of which are raised in this document. That you can't have one without the other. If we're going to develop an attainable work plan, we have to consider heritage matters. So I just don't see how we can do one without the other. Furthermore, I'm speaking about this document that we've received. It has to be part of our discussion.
Well, and just to respond to that, from my point of view, I think it probably is. It informs our discussion as would a similar document on environmental matters or a similar document on design guidelines. Planning is not a zero-sum game, and just because we focus on one element of it doesn't mean the others don't exist. And obviously, heritage is very significant to this community, and there's a lot of detail in those submissions.
Well, the work plan.
And this is where if we get into detailed discussion of individual suggestions around here, like what development charge relief and density bonusing and some of the other items on the work plan, that would be the time to consider, if we were going to move forward on any of those things, potential impact on heritage and build heritage and cultural heritage landscapes. And that, if we were advised that there would be impact, or we were advised a certain thing, maybe that ultimately influences whether or not we still recommend it. So, I mean, there's a possibility of dealing with that material that way. I'm not sure what else we can do. They're all valid planning objectives, and good planning is balancing all these various objectives on a project by project basis. So I don't know how we deal with it. Beyond that, I would not want it out there that we're ignoring it. I think it would be part of any responsible discussion on any of these options. But, it's just one element of those discussions. So that's just my view. And again, we're just sort of struggling as to how we see these things evolving as we go forward in our meetings. So anybody else have any thoughts on that? Who wants to speak? Brian, you haven't spoken yet.
With regard to the heritage issues, why don't we, as we progress through this matrix here, why don't we? I'm sure that heritage, it will be in every item. There will be an opportunity to speak to heritage. Other people may have other issues that they're going to bring in consistently. Rather than make a blanket statement now, let's just proceed, get talking about these things. And Councillor Foster and Nico, with your obvious interest in heritage, you can be the backstop, if you like, the people that can add a point or add a cogent issue to the discussion. But let's not hold up the discussion. Let's get on with it and work our way through this. We've got a lot of material, and as we go, we can deal with that and other issues as we go along. I think it's a given that heritage is going to be a part of every discussion we have.
Thank you. I think that's kind of where I was going, and obviously we have the appropriate people here to deal with that, as Nico is from the Heritage Committee, and Marianne, of course, and everything that's going on with cultural heritage landscapes. So however we deal with it, it's not going to be ignored, because we cannot ignore it. Councillor Foster.
What is the outcome going to be? Like, is the work plan is currently a draft. It remains in draft until it's approved. Because I have some concerns about what the outcome is going to be. So is the work plan a draft? And will it be a draft? And how long will it be a draft? And when will it be approved? And by approved, I mean once we've given full consideration to all matters, including heritage. When will the draft be turned into a document?
Who wants to address that? Mayor Linton.
Yeah, there's a little confusion here from Councillor Foster. This is not a report, and I don't want us to have a council session right now. I'd like to hear from the committee members. This is just to organize our thoughts and make sure that we're tracking on things. There's no draft. It's a work plan. There's no draft. There's no final document. It's a way that we can organize our thoughts and actually start to have the discussion about attainable housing. This committee has made it clear that that's what is the most priority for our community right now. We just got to get to it. I feel a sense of urgency on this matter. You know, we've spent already a couple meetings and we're talking around things. We have a whole heritage committee to deal with heritage stuff, and when there's tie-ins back, just as Brian suggested, we'll make sure that we bring heritage up. But we have to get down to it as a committee, and we just have to start talking about the first item on that work plan. Let's establish a target. I'd like to hear from Mariana what the students are coming to, and let's get on with it. This said this is what's important to this community. And we just have to get some traction here. And I know I'm getting a little bit tired of talking around things. Let's get to it.
All right, everybody seems to be nodding their head, at least most everybody is. I guess the question is, are we prepared to start in on that today, or has that become now the agenda for future meetings? Talk about our target next meeting, and development charges another meeting, and zoning changes another meeting. Is that work through this list top to bottom with detailed discussions on each of those points, and therefore the work plan has focused that discussion, which I gather is the intent. Is that how we see it proceeding from here on in? All right. Anybody else have another thought on that? So today, are we prepared to start in today on the target, or is it something you just want to say today, we read this, absorb it, and then starting at the next meeting, discuss item 1, which is the target? Anybody have any feelings on that? Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Don. Just with regards to, you know, the work plan, I mean, that is all of the advisory committees have a similar type of thing that they work through. And to your point, Brad had mentioned Marianne does have an update with regards to her discussion with the students. I think it's important for the committee to hear that. There is some time period that work will need to take place. So whether it's the next meeting or how quickly the students can pull that together, then we'll be able to come back to the committee with that information then to make to the next step of the work plan. So I think it would be good if we could hear from Mariana with that update, and then we can talk about, you know, where they're at, what their timing is, and where we can what we talk about at the next meeting.
Great idea.
Okay, Mariana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, so I do have an update in that the terms of reference were, we basically have confirmed that, and the students are working now through the literature review. So I expect that they'll have that completed by next week. So I'll have an update, and through that, we would likely have a definition and information regarding the targets for our next meeting. So we should be in much better shape for the next meeting to have a lot of that information that we can discuss moving forward. But I do have an update session with the students next week, and they should have their literature review, best practices review completed by then.
All right, thank you. So would that leave us in a position then to start to discuss this item in detail and maybe come up with a recommendation at the next meeting of this committee?
Yes, I believe so. I believe we'll be in a position at the next meeting to have a lot of that information available for discussion.
Thank you. And would we then be in a position maybe to move to the development charges piece of it, which is item 2 on the work plan, at the next meeting as well, or would that follow along at a later meeting?
I think Brett's had something to add there, so I'm not sure if he has some comments.
Okay, Brett.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add in terms of working through the different things that are in that work plan, again, it's the recommendations that came out of the county's attainable housing strategy, and they're not in any particular order. So what the committee might want to do at a future meeting is discuss whether or not any of those items are a higher priority than any of the others. I think we're all clear that before we can do anything about attainable housing, we need a definition and a target of what that is. So that's the highest priority. But the other items, you know, the for example, I would say, I think a CIP is something that other municipalities have looked at, might be a priority. Maybe the development charges is not such a priority. Maybe the additional dwelling units is not such a priority. To get something actually moving that's going to make a difference in the amount of time that we have, you know, to go here. So there is, I think some maybe need to talk about whether any of the items need to move up higher on any kind of priority list. But again, the first one is the key one.
Okay, no, thank you. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So we could have, if we do here on the first one and have a discussion on it at the next meeting, and then maybe discuss that issue of prioritizing the other items on there and get that resolved at the next meeting. To the mayor's point, we don't want to be talking around this forever. We want to get into the nitty gritty on some of these, I think. So if we can get to that point after the next meeting and then start in and something else that's identified as a priority and get into the details. After all, we're going to be tasked with making specific recommendations on these items. I think obviously that implies that we have a fairly detailed discussion of what they entail, what their impact is in terms of certainly other things like heritage, like the environment and so on. So yeah, we need to have those discussions, and we need to have discussions soon in order to bring recommendations forward at a reasonable time. So that makes sense to me. We talk about item 1 and the target next meeting, and we talk about prioritizing the other items on the list for further discussion. And then we go forward on the basis of that prioritization in subsequent meetings. That is a way forward. It may not be the only way forward. It sounds like a good way forward. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Tony, I see you anxious to get in here. Don't forget your mute.
How about that?
All right.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's a really good way forward. And I was going to suggest, if we agree with that suggestion, then maybe there are some specific questions that committee members might like to have answered before we can have a fulsome discussion about that at the next meeting. So I was going to ask if we could send particular questions, like, for example, I don't know what ramifications would have on the development charges, like how much would we lose from that? So detailed questions like that might be germane to the conversation. If we could send them, and I don't know if we'll go to Brett or not before the next meeting, but that's something we could do as homework kind of thing.
We could, or that would come up in the course of the discussion if we picked a date to discussion. So I'm open to either one. You don't want to have too much burden on staff before we decide that that's a route we want to go. And then in the context of deciding how we want to go, those questions probably would arise anyway. You would hope they would. But if there's anything you need up front in order to be able to intelligently discuss development charges, then I don't see why we couldn't have a basic information package on any of those items. I'm just picking development charges in advance of a detailed discussion on it. I think that's simply a question for staff and how they want to move this through. So either one of those works for me. Again, I think to the mayor's point, we want to get on with setting the target, define our terms pretty clearly, and then get a kind of a schedule of discussion going forward. And then whatever information gets generated as a result of that, we get it or we use it. So it's kind of how I see it going. But anyway, anybody else? Don, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I agree that we need to get the target first. If you don't have a target number, you're not going to be able to realize what the impact on the township is for development charges. It rattles, all the money rattles out of that. That is the most critical thing. And it doesn't mean that we can't change it. As we go through this process, we maybe need to up the numbers. But the thing is, we need to start off with something that gives the township an idea of development charges. How much money do they want to forego or move around or whatever? But you need to know how many places you're trying to create.
Fair enough. Anybody else? Nico.
Yes, thank you. Further to that discussion, when you talk about attainable housing and you talk about target numbers, I'm not sure how you can do that in the absence of a needs assessment. And what I mean by a needs assessment is how many people are actually out there that are looking for attainable housing? Is there some kind of, there's Guelph Wellington Housing Authority, which has a huge wait list, but it's for subsidized housing only. And I'm not sure how we can proceed on establishing targets, as I said, without a parallel needs assessment.
Okay, thank you. It seems to me there was something in all that county material that kind of addressed that, but again, that could come up in the course of the discussion. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the targets that we're talking about are really not setting a number of units that we're looking at. We're talking about setting what is an attainable level for people to be able to afford. We're not going to be saying we need 1,000 units immediately. I think it's really just, really looking at what within Center Wellington is attainable housing and what is that marketplace in. There's lots of organizations that will reach out to about various different levels of, social housing in the county, community resource centers. So there's lots of other committees that we've talked to in the past, the Center Wellington Social Justice Committee. There's lots of documentation coming from the Community Foundation with their reports and things of that nature. So I think there's lots of that information that we can pull together to talk about, how great the need is. I mean, we just had Maddie, who left our committee, passionately speaking about how those needs are in the community. So I don't think it's necessary saying we need to get to this number right away. It's about a strategy of how we start just getting attainable housing available in the community. And for there, then we can start looking into further along, how many units are we looking at over the length of time and over the years.
And we do have the information on, market value of housing, different types of housing and also average incomes and how much income would be required to afford certain types of housing. I think that's already out there, and a target may be more of just bringing supply on to meet income levels or something, as opposed to a fixed number of units. But I think all of that is a legitimate part of the discussion. And I think all we're saying here is let's start that discussion at the next meeting, see where it takes us. And if we need more information on the need, that would come out of that discussion, I would suggest. Anyway, anybody else? I know Councillor Foster, you were trying to get in here.
Well, a couple of points. Thank you, Chairman. I'm hearing a kind of a mixed message here. One is that the attainable housing work plan is really just a tracking document, but I'm also hearing that it's going to have targets in it, and that tells me no, it's not just a tracking document; it's the working document, and we still haven't made it clear how such a weighty document will be approved, what the intended outcome is going to be, whether it's be a planning and guiding document. I'm hearing very mixed messages here, and if it's going to be a planning document, it needs to be approved by council. And I agree with Nico's points as well on the subject of needs assessment. You cannot resolve a problem unless you know how large it is. You must quantify it. And Maddie Smith was one person, and I'm not discounting anything she said. She's one person. You need hard data on the true needs of the community. So you have to do that. You need to have full quantitative analysis on the scope of the problem if you really want to resolve it. So my final point, Mr. Chair, is if this is going to be a planning document, then it cannot be developed without a fulsome discussion about heritage. And I know I've said this many times, but what I'm hearing is we're going to give it a token amount of consideration, and that troubles me.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Michael, hey. You should have a nice flavor of our discussions now.
Well, I said I thought I could bring the perspective of a consultant to this, and that's what I'm going to try to do. Acknowledging that heritage issues are very important. I don't think anything I see in this advisory committee work plan speaks to ignoring existing heritage planning policy that's in place. And being an applicant on many projects that have had a heritage component, it's something that is addressed on a project by project basis within the framework of the policy that's already there. So my sense is, there's some really great ideas here in the areas of consideration, and I've only had a chance to look at it very quickly, but I think there's some ideas that would be looked at very favorably by the development community. And not discounting the importance of heritage, but I think it would inevitably come up in the course of making an application for development. So yeah, that's my thought on that piece. And I guess I just wanted, I think there is real value to establishing a definition for what attainable housing means in this community, as well as a target for the number of units. So if that were something that could come up in the meeting next week, I think it's of key importance here, because in and of itself, it's a word that can mean different things to different people. It's like sustainable, right? What is sustainable? What is attainable in the context of what is looking to be achieved here? So that's my thoughts.
All right, thank you for that. I think that was kind of along the lines of what I was trying to say earlier, that just because you focus on one thing, the other things don't go away. They're all part of it. So who hasn't? Steve, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Chairman Fisher. Two things that I want to bring to the committee in consideration of Michael's comments there, which were really well served. As builder developer, I'm going to count on the Canadian Home Builders Association and the Ontario Home Builders Association, who have done a lot of work in this area. And I'm going to try to bring that information forward, because it does have a framework and a ground concept for how we can integrate or make housing more attainable. It's nothing to do with affordable, but it's about attainable. And I'd like to be able to bring that forward, because I think they've done a lot of work in this area already. And I'm hoping to express that and make it part of our work plan if we can. And then there's already an entity in the community that is struggling to help in this regard, and that's Habitat for Humanity. I've spoken to Steve Howard, and right now they're looking or begging for projects, and they don't have land availability for it. And maybe that's a group or an entity that we can consult with that maybe already has a needs assessment or has information that can help in that regard. And maybe there's a synergy that can happen between Habitat for Humanity, developers, and the municipality to make a portion of property available for them to build already housing that meets all the criteria of attainable housing. And I think what's really important for us as a group, especially and consistent with our Healthy Growth Committee concept and mandate, is location. I think there's areas within the community that we should be definitely pinpointing as a location for building such type of housing. And I think we just need to take a good long look at it, because there's properties within the community that are underutilized or not being able to be utilized because of certain considerations, such as like brownfield sites. And it may be something that the community can rally behind or get behind, and maybe some of these lands can be made available for housing that could be considered for attainable. So those are just a couple of thoughts that I'd like to bring forward, and hopefully I can bring forward through the work plan.
Thank you. And I think you probably, if you've got anything that you would want to forward in advance, that anything that's in writing from somewhere that that could be distributed to the committee, that's fine. Certainly, as we discuss it, you can discuss and bring forward anything you wish at that point in time that's pertinent to the discussion. I just anecdotally, as to Nico's point, I would think that there's probably a fair amount of information already out there as to the market and the needs and who can buy and afford houses and who can't and that kind of thing. And it may just be a question of pulling that together somehow rather than, retaining someone to provide a brand new study for that. So if that information is available to inform our discussion as we go forward, that would be very helpful as well. We want to move along using the information that's available to the extent that it works. And if we have gaps after that, then we can try and fill them. But it seems to me to set a target, you don't need a whole lot of information, but we'll see. So is there consensus on the committee to start the discussion around the target, the idea of a target, what it looks like, how it would work, and what we would be prepared to recommend to council? Because again, as Councillor Foster pointed out, certainly everything that comes out of this committee in the form of recommendation simply has to go to council, and there's where the real debate will take place. So are we prepared to start that discussion next meeting? And if anybody has any information that they think would inform that discussion, if they can package it somehow and get it to the clerk and that can be made available to the rest of us prior to the meeting, that would be very helpful. And then we go from there, we have the discussion. If there's information we think we still need after that, we ask for it. If we have enough to feel comfortable making a recommendation, we do with that. And then we move this process along. Is that kind of what I'm hearing as the consensus of the group here? I see people nodding. Yes. All right. So does that leave us then done for the day in terms of what we can add to this discussion? Or is there anything else that a point that needs to be made right now, given that that's how we're going to go? All right. Oh, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one last point. Much of the work plan talks about infill and housing in the central business districts and so on. That is where it intersects exactly with heritage, and this is why I've raised this yet again so often. I cannot see how we can address attainable housing in the cores of Fergus and Elora without a fulsome discussion of heritage. And that is very, very, it's critically important, quite frankly, because that's where the two items intersect. Intensifying in the core is exactly part of heritage conservation, and the two items can't be dealt with in isolation. So this is why it's so important in my view. And it has to be part of a work plan. Heritage must be a key component of any work plan.
Well, I would respond to that by saying I agreed with you right up until the very last statement that heritage is very important, as are other things, as we discuss the intersection of these things on location. I'm not sure it needs to be specifically part of a work plan simply because it exists. I think, as Michael pointed out, all of these rules and regulations and processes and guidelines and policies exist. They don't not exist simply because we haven't made them part of the work plan. And any project that comes forward will consider those things. It has to. That's the point of the submissions that we received, is that that's provincial policy, that's provincial law, and we're not getting around that. The question is, where do you focus that analysis? And I don't think the fact that we're not addressing it specifically at this point in time implies, and it should not imply, that it's being ignored. No one in this committee, I believe, would suggest for a minute that you would ignore heritage considerations in dealing with any development application and dealing with any township actions that are supposed to help development applications along. The idea that we're getting at here is there's a specific kind of development application that may be required in this community, and that as a matter of township policy, there are barriers to producing the kind of housing that we're looking to produce here, we want to identify those barriers and if possible, do what we can, suggest that the township do what it can to remove those barriers, because it's private sector initiative, and the private sector has to be able to realize that the production of this kind of housing is feasible and profitable. And if there are policies and financial procedures and processes of the township that make that difficult, our job here is to analyze them and see whether or not we can change that. It's fundamentally a question of supply and demand, and right now there's not enough supply. So nowhere in that thought process, and nowhere in the actual process of dealing with applications does heritage get ignored or anything else get ignored. It comes up, it has to come up. It's a matter of provincial law that it comes up. All we're saying is we want to look at specific things on the affordable housing side that we may be able to suggest the township could do to help produce more supply of affordable housing as we define it. And we're going to define it in the process of setting our targets. And whether that turns out to be the case or not, who knows? The planning process goes forward in any event. All of those considerations that come into play on every application. And there is an intersection, you're quite right. And that's what planning is navigating that intersection and coming up with a reasonable response based on those things, because there's lots of priorities. There's environmental priorities, there's heritage priorities, there's housing priorities, there's financial priorities, there's design priorities. And all of those things have to work in the context of an individual application for it to go ahead. And that's never, ever going to change. And we're not suggesting that changes. We're just saying on the affordable housing side, what can we suggest to make things easier for that kind of housing to be produced? So that's kind of the way I look at it. And therefore, I agree with your point, up to the point that it's a necessary precondition to us moving any further ahead. I don't think it is, because it's always there and it's always going to be there. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that, but I think we've come to a consensus here that we can start the discussion next meeting. If there's any more information that people want to put forward to the committee in terms of need, in terms of definition or ideas about attainable housing, feel free to send it in and make it available to all of us through the clerk. And not, it'll definitely come up as we discuss it. And to the mayor's point, we need to get moving on something that we could positively recommend to council. Again, a lot of these discussions will be replayed at council, I'm sure, and that's probably the appropriate forum for them. And certainly decisions will be made. No action that's on this work plan will happen without the approval of council in a public meeting. And anybody who wants anything to say about it will certainly have every opportunity to do so. So I think we're in a position to move forward unless there's some real strenuous objection. Do I see any? No, I don't. All right. Is that sufficient for the discussion today, or do we need to flog this horse anymore? All right. I see a few thumbs up here. Okay. Okay. So where are we? Is that the agenda? I got to pull it up here. There we go. All right. I think then, in the absence of any additional comment, that's the meeting for today. Next one is scheduled for April the 7th. I'll look forward to that. And we'll have a more in-depth discussion of the whole idea of attainable housing and targets. We may, if we're lucky, maybe even able to make a recommendation around that coming out of that meeting. That would be really nice. We'll hear from the students, and we'll have more information if anybody has it to bring to the table. So having said that, I guess the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Good discussion today.
Thanks, Don.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Don.
Hey, everyone.
Hopefully, Michael, you're not worried now, are you? You made the right choice.
Good discussion, everybody.
It was. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
everybody. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Take care.
Welcome, Michael.